So much, Adam. Being an engineer, I've spent most of my years thinking that to persuade anyone, there's a simple way to do it. You just use logic. Any subject, pure and simple. If you can show me that the benefits of one option outweigh another, then logically you are bound to accept my recommendation and take that on board. But of course, I was wrong. In 1993, I was working offshore as a supervisor. I was new to the team. I could see lots of things that could be improved. So I carefully thought through my logical suggestions, put them to my supervisor, and he's still thinking about them. They all fell on deaf ears, and I thought I couldn't understand why my suggestions weren't being acted upon. In 2002, I moved from working with oil and gas operating companies to service contractor. And my first role was to secure a major contract with the French oil and gas giant Total. We already had the contract, we just had to hold on to it. It would be costly, it would be disruptive, it would be illogical for the client not to leave the contract with us. We couldn't lose, but we did. They took the contract away from us, and I felt that I didn't understand what was going on. And that's when I started to study the whole psychology of persuasion in a business context. And that's what I'll share with you today, because persuasion is a complex subject, but it's not a new subject by any means. I'm going to check I don't hit the wrong button here. Okay. When I'm looking at persuasion, I look at it through the lens of not a modern problem, but one that Aristotle first came across over 2,000 years ago. When Aristotle framed his terminology around rhetoric, rhetoric was in effect the art of persuasion. And he said rhetoric had three parts to it: ethos, logos, and pathos. You need to establish your trustworthiness, which is the ethos part. You need to present a strong logical argument, the logos part, and you need to make an emotional connection too, which is the pathos part. Now, since Aristotle's time, there have been lots of experiments in behavioral science that have shown that there are more factors than perhaps the Greeks were aware of at that time. Persuading people to change is difficult, especially if it takes effort on their part, or if they don't really buy into what you're saying in the first place. But if they're genuinely open to a discussion, they might be persuaded if you can pull all the right psychological levers. And this takes a rigorous approach. And the benefit of taking a rigorous approach is that it hugely improves your chances of persuading people to accept your suggestions and potentially change their behavior or their beliefs. The danger of a makeshift approach is not only will people potentially not go with what you're saying, they possibly feel a bit alienated and distant and tend to actually resist your suggestions. When me and my colleague Derek train people in business storytelling, we give them templates, we give them techniques, we give them coaching, we make them think about how they persuade their audience, and they do this by pulling the correct levers. And the bottom line for us is it works, because having been trained and to become better persuaders, they are able to transform their business success. Now, as Adam said, I have got no specific expertise in climate change, but the challenges are clearly massive. Persuading people to do things differently and to change their lifestyles is a challenge in itself. Thinking if that's the right slide, but it doesn't matter. Asking people to do things like selecting lower transport options, carbon transport options, or not to fly is difficult when people have become so used to it and it's so cheap and it's so easy. Asking people to spend money to make their homes more energy efficient when there's a cost of living crisis is a difficult ask there. Asking people to select products that have a lower carbon footprint, even though those products may be more expensive because they're locally sourced, for instance, and asking people to judiciously recycle any waste that they do create. These are all difficult things. But there are other factors at play, for instance, because, for instance, I would say that most of us, quite frankly, don't like being told what to do. We don't like being told what to do. And the reason for that is because it threatens us. And the first way it threatens us, it removes our control, because you're removing my capacity to make my own decisions. Therefore, somehow I feel threatened, and my psychological response to that is to fight or to flight and flee. You might also be burdening me with stress by asking me to do things when I'm already flat out busy, under stress, and you're asking me to take on more activities and more change. And I'm saying, honestly, just because it's your priority, it doesn't necessarily mean to say that it goes to the top of my list. And that very act of considering that introduces stress and therefore threat. And the third thing is, if you're trying to shame me into doing something, then you're judging me as being less better than you are, then you're threatening my self-esteem and my self-worth. And the same response will be there. I'm likely to resist or to want to escape the conversation. So just because some person thinks something's important, it doesn't necessarily mean the person you're speaking to thinks it's important. If you've ever come across anybody who's really into coffee and they talk about the quality of coffee and they're passionate about it, most of them think that everybody cares as much about coffee as they do. And in reality, most people don't. Most people just want something wet and hot to drink. But they don't get the psychology of thinking, well, if I think it's important, you must think it's important. Now, there's a couple of other factors at play here as well. Loss aversion. You know, as human beings, we tend to fear a loss of something more than we value the gain of something else. So when I'm asked to make a change, if it's going to put me out of pocket, for instance, and even in the long term, I might be thinking there's a chance that happens. You know what? I'll probably not put those solar panels on my roof, because spending 15 grand up front to do all this stuff to my house, I might never see that money back. And somebody will change the rules and the energy prices will change and the tariffs will move and I'm going to lose out. So it's simpler for me just to simply do nothing, which takes us to the second psychological fact here, omission bias. As human beings, we would rather take the negative consequences of doing nothing than the same consequences of doing something, because that way we don't feel we caused the problem. This is why people will sit when conditions are getting worse and worse and worse, rather than take action, often in the most extreme circumstances. But in terms of change, it's easier not to change than it is to change. And we accept that as an omission bias. And the third thing is, it's about trust. If somebody's asking me to change my life and change my behavior, my first reaction to them is, why should I trust you? I don't know you. You're a politician and you're telling me to change my life. And in 2 weeks' time, you're going to get caught stealing money from somebody and you're going to get fired. So why should I trust you? So why should I accept what you're going to say? And I generalize, but it does apply to all politicians. So according to US persuasion specialist, Dr. Robert Cialdini, he says there are 6 factors that impact persuasion. And these are in addition to the ones I've just mentioned. These are the 6 factors here. He talks about reciprocity. Now, reciprocity is value. If you want me to do something, I want something back in return. Now, that value might be do something and you will create an environmental benefit, or it might be you might create an economic saving, or it might be that your house gets warmer, whatever it happens to be. But there's usually an exchange of perceived value, this reciprocity here. Second thing is about scarcity. People like things if it's special or different or unique. So if you can tell me to do something in a way that I'm going to get some unique benefit from it, I'm probably more interested in this. There's some great examples of this about how scarcity actually increases the value of things without any real logic. The most expensive handbag in the world is a Birkin handbag that sells for £250,000. Now, for £250,000, I would like the handbag to be made out of unicorn skin and made of gold handles, but it's not. It's made in the same factory, in the same workshops as bags that cost 1,000 times less. It does the same thing. It carries things and it looks nice. And yet the only reason it's cost so much is because you're not getting one. Because there's only one of them or 2 of them. And Victoria Beckham's got one and you're not getting the other. And that's why they're so valued. You see it more pragmatically on a day-to-day basis. If you're ever booking a hotel on booking.com and you're booking a Tuesday night in Scunthorpe and you think there'll be plenty of hotels here. And as you're scanning the room, a little box comes up and says, there's 4 other people looking at this hotel at the same time as you. Ah! And there's only 1 room left at this price. Now, if you go back on the following night, you'll find the same 4 people are looking at the room, and the same room is available, but it's to induce this sense of scarcity, which increases the perceived value for us. Next thing's about what authority does the person trying to do the persuading have? So if somebody comes to me and says, look, you must change your car for an electric car. Why do you say that? Well, I don't know. I ride a bike. I never drive a car. I've just heard it's a good thing to do. You're not really speaking from a position of authority. So when people try to persuade us, it's good if they've got some credentials, if they've got some expertise, if they've got some credibility, if they know what they're talking about. And the same applies absolutely in business. We like social proof. As human beings, we don't like to be the first. So we like to know that there's evidence that if we make a change, it will make a difference in business or in life. So we need to wait and see and say, well, okay, if I do this, if I'm the first in my street to put a heat pump in, am I going to be embarrassed in a year's time by having to replace it with an oil-fired boiler? I'll wait until somebody else does it. Mm-hmm. We like to get on with people. If the person that's trying to persuade us is somebody that we just cannot see ourselves ever having a relationship with, and I mean a professional relationship with, then it's likely that we're going to say, oh, that ghastly person, I can't listen to what they've got to say. So if people go out their way to alienate themselves to us, the chances of them persuading us are hugely reduced. We tend to listen to people that we think we could get on with, and we also know that what they're talking about. And whatever change people are putting my way, it needs to be consistent with my values. So if somebody's asking me to change and it's inconsistent with my values, then I'm never going to do it. And no amount of logic or any of the other factors here is going to persuade me to do so. So, don't waste our time trying to persuade people to do things where fundamentally they don't believe in what you're saying, because you're not going to change them with your persuasion, etc. It's these deeply held beliefs that are immutable and difficult to change. Once we recognize them, the easiest thing to do is to move on to the next person and try and change them instead. If you're looking for more information on these 6 factors, Influence the Psychology of Persuasion by Dr. Robert Cialdini contains these 6 factors, for instance. Now, if we combine these models together, these 3 things that I've talked together, we can come up with something that covers these areas of carbon footprint, of flying, of recycling. So when you tell me what to do, I'm worried about control, I'm worried about stress, I'm worried about self-esteem, loss aversion, omission bias, and affective trust. When we're telling people to pitch a change in business, this is typically what we'll do. We'll say, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to get my attention. If I'm not interested in talking to you, you can't get me to listen. So you've got to get my attention. So you must have something interesting to say. The second thing, I want you to tell me what's in it for me. Now, that benefit might be an environmental benefit or a benefit for other people, but there has to be a benefit that accrues from the change you're asking me to make, or else what's the point? The third thing, I want really simple, clear terms. What is it you're asking me to do? How does it work? And how does the benefit arise? Now, it might be very obvious, but if it's not, you kind of need to explain it to me in simple ABC terms. And then I need to know that you're credible and you know what you're talking about. And I want some evidence to back up what you're asking me to do. Show me that this actually works. And then I want very clear ask. What is it you're asking me to do? Because if you ask me to save the planet, I don't know where to start. If you ask me to recycle my milk bottles, I could maybe do that. So you've got to be very precise and clear. Now, those are the kind of 6 primary questions, but there are 6 other questions that I'm sitting asking myself if you're asking me to do something. I'm weighing up the options. Now, you don't know what other options I'm considering, but I'm weighing up the options and I'm thinking, what's the best option? And on many occasions, the best option is probably, nah, I'll do nothing, for the reasons we talked about before. I'm also thinking to myself, could I work with you? Or do we dislike each other enough that I'm not going to listen to you? Is what you're asking me easy to say yes to? Because if it's too difficult and it's too hard, I might not have the money or the resources. I'm just not going to do it. Secondly, is it risky? If it's too much of a risk for me, then I'm going to struggle to say yes to that, because I don't want to take risk because it might damage me financially or reputationally. So I'd rather let somebody else take that risk than me take that risk. And I kind of want to know what makes the change that you're asking me to make different from what other people are asking me to do? What makes it special? And finally, I'm going to ask, does this fit with my worldview? Does this fit with my core values? If it fits with my values, then I might be inclined to say yes. If it doesn't, I'm definitely going to say no. So there's a number of different factors come together there, but to make it easy to consume, I've summarized it all in a handy one-page checklist. And if anybody wants a copy of that checklist, you can either photograph it off the screen or drop me a note, bob@ab15.org, and I'll send you a PDF copy of that, which summarizes the 12 points that I've just shared with you just now. And I'm 47 seconds over. My apologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. Can we stop the recordings?